Our state attorneys general are back with us. Andrea Campbell of Massachusetts, Aaron Ford of Nevada, and Kwame Raoul of Illinois. It's great to have all three of you back with us. Mr. Ford, since 2020, we know that myth-busting and voter education have become a large part of election officials' work. So as we are approaching 2024, how can and does your office get ahead of potential threats to election officials and to the overall integrity of our elections? Is there a way to prevent these attacks on our democracy in your state?
Well, it's a great question, and what we do here is work hand in hand with our chief elections officer, the Secretary of State. I'm happy to say that we were able to elect Francisco Aguilar, a person who is not an election denier, go figure, and we'll be working with him to ensure that folks understand the process behind voting, the safeguards that we have in place to protect the right to vote. And what I will say is, just reflecting on my own ancestral personal experiences, is that the right to vote is going to remain sacrosanct. I'm going to do all that I can to ensure that folks are able to exercise their right to vote and to do so free from tumult and free from turmoil and free from attacks. As I said, last election cycle, we stay ready so we don't have to get ready when it comes to pushing back on nonsensical lies around the voter process. And we're going to be doing that going forward as well.
Mr. Raoul, last summer, you joined a coalition of 21 attorneys general, including Mr. Ford, in asking the Supreme Court to not weaken voting rights in the Alabama redistricting case, Merrill versus Milligan. Talk to us about how the fight for voting rights and maintaining election integrity are actually two sides of the same coin, or that they're actually connected.
Yeah, we ought to be fighting for the access to vote, for making voting easier. Meanwhile, we have efforts throughout our country to make voting harder, to disenfranchise people in the redistricting process. And the wonderful thing about us as state AGs is that we can work collectively to protect voting rights, to protect our democracy. In fact, it's a former chief deputy from Andrea's state who heads up States United that has gathered us as state AGs and other lawyers throughout the country to work to protect democracy throughout the country. So I'm not just concerned with what happens within the state of Illinois. I'm concerned with what happens throughout the country to make sure that people have access to vote, to make sure that people are fairly represented in the redistricting process.
Ms. Campbell, the other thing that we've seen Republicans go after, reproductive rights in this country. This week you had 20 Republican attorneys general warning CVS and Walgreens against mailing abortion pills in their states, indicating that they would take legal action to fight it. You've talked about the importance of standing up for reproductive rights in this country. What do you make of this move?
It's going in the wrong direction. And if anything, it is indicative of what we're seeing, of course, at the Supreme Court level, taking away protections that were guaranteed. And if I've been reminding folks to pay attention to who your attorney general is in your state, because I know everyone who's on this panel is fighting to make sure all women and folks have the right to have the right and access to an abortion, the right to parent the way they so choose. And so this is critically important. In Massachusetts, I'm really proud that we are leading the way on these issues in many ways. We have codified the right to an abortion in our health plans. There's legislation that's been passed to make sure that your health care plans can be used to access these critical health care services. We just launched a hotline that is free and confidential for anyone in the state or anyone looking to come to Massachusetts for these health care services to be able to call to get their questions answered, not just patients, but also providers. And so this is an area where, frankly, the Democratic attorneys general are stepping up across all states to really push for this basic right that we should all have. And at the end of the day, this is about justice. This is about power. It's all connected to the racial justice conversations we're having. And so we also link it to maternal health issues, health disparities as well. And I'm really excited to be working with my folks across state lines to make sure that these rights are protected.
We have talked about police reform, voter integrity, women's rights, a whole lot more, but I do want to ask you about education for a moment, all three of you. On Wednesday, the College Board released a new syllabus for the AP African American Studies course that Governor Ron DeSantis and Florida education officials contested. They cut out mentions of Black Lives Matter. They cut out mentions of criminal justice, reparations, the names of prominent Black authors. Ms. Campbell, what is at stake when education is so blatantly watered down under this guise that officials in Florida are saying is indoctrination and not education?
And that's exactly right. I'm really proud to come from a state, of course, that has incredible academic institutions that stood up immediately to call this out and did it collectively, working not only with across various higher ed institutions here in Massachusetts, but across state lines to make sure that we were fighting for just folks to have basic information about this country. It may be painful to talk about slavery and racism, to look at the 1619 Project, to really understand why systemic racism continues to show up in different forms in this country, but it is critical. You can't solve or address a problem if you're unwilling to talk about it. And we know education is the foundation in which our children, and I have 2 young boys, and folks have access to this information that is critical. And so we have an opportunity to stand up to actually, I think, center issues of education. Most folks view an attorney general as a top cop or just chief law enforcement or just a prosecutor. We also run policy shops, and we have an obligation to stand up to make sure that our folks are getting the education and the facts that they need, and most importantly, that will transform this country to be equitable and anti-racist and live up to its values and democratic principles.
Mr. Ford, your thoughts on that, on the debate in Florida raging there with the College Board and AP African Studies?
Yeah. Listen, I'm fresh off of a re-election campaign trying to keep this job. And I remember being on the trail telling folks that some want to use the word progressive in a bad phrase. But remember, the opposite of progressive is regressive. And so many Republicans, frankly, not all of them, but so many of them are trying to be regressive and take our country backwards. The United States Supreme Court obviously has taken us back 50 years in reproductive rights. You can't say gay in Florida, and apparently now you can't say black. We're moving from history to his story. You remember that whole phraseology there. And at the end of the day, it seems to me that what we have to continue to do is push back against this. I'm gravely disappointed in the AP course at this point in the College Board. My son has taken 11 AP classes. He won't be taking this one because it is not true history, apparently. It's not something that the AP is interested in this juncture. And so I'll pass the mic to my colleague, but I'm reminded of Carter G. Woodson's book, The Miseducation of the Negro, where he talks about when you control the way a man thinks, you don't have to worry about the way he acts. Florida is trying to control the mindset of its citizenry so that they don't have to worry about them understanding the self-efficacy that they can have in true history. And so I will continue to push back on that from across the board, and I'm sorely disappointed in the College Board.
Mr. Raoul, I'm sorry we're almost out of time, but I'll give you the final word, sir. Give me your thoughts on it.
Well, I'm the father of a recent college graduate who studied African American studies, and I'm so glad that she did, and that she can relate it to not just history, but the condition of African Americans in America today. And it's important for everybody to be uncomfortable with our history. It's important for us to know our history and to know how it relates to the conditions that exist today for African Americans in America.
It is a real privilege to speak to the three of you tonight. I greatly appreciate your time. 3 attorneys general from the states of Massachusetts, Nevada, Illinois, Kwame Raoul, Aaron Ford, and Andrea Campbell. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciate your insights this evening. We're going to have more Amen after the break.